I've struggled for a few days trying to figure out how to talk about New World. Originally, I was going to talk about the flaws of the game. The poor performance, the obtrusive user interface, the inability to get immersed into the game like I normally can with MMOs. But I didn't want to make a video about something I didn't enjoy. There's plenty of those kinds of videos out there, and I feel like I wouldn't have anything new or interesting to say about it. However, I stuck with New World. The combat was enjoyable enough to where I wanted to see how it played out over a bit of a longer stretch, and there aren't a lot of classless MMOs out there like this at the moment. Only other one I can think of right now is old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3. So I stuck with it, and over time I actually found myself starting to look past some of its flaws and appreciate the really satisfying combat and game underneath, even if it does still have some pretty glaring issues that we'll get into later. Before I get started into the rest of the video, however, I do want to make it clear that this is not a review or deep analysis of the game, its value, or its endgame content. The debate on how one can judge an MMO has been going on since the genre first began, and if you are the type of player that feels an MMO can only be judged after spending hundreds or thousands of hours in it, that's totally fine. However, I do not share that opinion, and this video may be frustrating if I'm discussing things that have a different perception after hundreds of hours. At the time of writing this, I've spent 43.5 hours on the game, which is longer than I've spent in many other games that I play. This video only serves to discuss the things that I found enjoyable or in need of improvement during my first few dozen hours with it. Right off the bat, I have to say that the combat feels really good. Your regular hits will attack nearby enemies if they stand close enough together, and a lot of abilities will knock enemies down, back, or up, making combat feel a lot more satisfying moment to moment than a lot of other MMOs that I've played. Each weapon type in the game has an associated skill tree to go along with it. These skill trees level up from 1 to 20, and each weapon has 2 different skill trees. I appreciate that from levels 1 to 10, you're freely able to adjust your points so that you can experiment before the major grind from levels 10 to 20 kicks in. I started focusing on a two-handed hammer, and I really enjoyed the weight that weapon felt like it had. It didn't feel terribly slow, but I definitely felt punished by wasting a swing or ability and missing the enemy, which is another aspect of combat that is unique to New World. For example, with my blunderbuss, I could aim near an enemy, fire at them, and it could completely miss them if they weren't actually lined up in my crosshair. Elder Scrolls Online gets close to this kind of system, but it always lived a little bit in between a tab targeting and action combat system. New World takes it fully into action combat territory, and I often find myself swinging at the air thinking that my hits will connect, despite not being on the enemy. Old habits do tend to die hard. While there's some problems with New World that I'll get into later, this is definitely one of the most impressive parts of the game, in my opinion, and I'd love to see how this combat holds up in larger engagements. Furthermore, you do have a dodge button that isn't terribly useful in the beginning due to the difficulty being on the easier side up front, like most MMOs, but I imagine this will become an invaluable ability if I were to run through dungeons at higher level content. Once I started using the musket and I had to make every shot count, I actually found myself using the dodge more frequently, and I think that as I progress in the game, I'll find myself using it more and more. Being able to have a secondary weapon handy with its own skills is a pretty standard system at this point in MMOs. But since there's no limitation to what weapon types you can level up, I found myself really impressed by the level of freedom the game provides you. Again, going back to Elder Scrolls Online, I appreciate that no weapon type is off limits due to the class system, but the same class system keeps certain skill trees locked behind it. New World is actually closer to, and bear with me please, RuneScape. You create your character, and from then on everything is open to you depending on what you want to focus on. There's nothing locked behind a class, and if you decide you want to start training in a specific weapon type, you simply start using it and level up the trees. This system, in conjunction with the ability to respec everything about your character in the early levels, means that New World is actually one of the most flexible MMOs that I've played. While I have been having an absolute blast with the combat and freedom the game provides me, I unfortunately feel the same cannot be said for the way New World is constantly breaking immersion with its obtrusive and overbearing interface. I'm going to bring up an image I took, which I feel truly encapsulates the problem with the user interface in its current state. While some of these user interface components, like the chat box, can be hidden by manually setting the opacity down to 0, this is how the user interface looks by default. If you were to crop this image into the parts of it that are unobstructed just by the interface on the perimeter of the screen, your window into the game is way too small, and that's ignoring the big yellow icons that float in the world to mark targets of a quest. While there's nothing wrong with having an interface that provides a wealth of information, and this UI does provide relevant and important information, I feel as though the game fades into the background while the UI sits in the foreground. I'm constantly seeing big loot pop-ups, weapons gaining XP, quests being updated, chats coming in, weapon cooldowns finishing, and more, often all at the same time. Imagine watching a fireplace video at home. The crackle of the fire is nice, the quality of the fire is great, and the atmosphere is pleasant. Before you know it, you may even feel like you're watching a real fireplace. That's New World's core gameplay. But now imagine that fireplace video started having a little exclamation mark pop up in each of the 4 corners of the screen every 5 seconds. That alone doesn't negate the great sounds and quality of the fireplace video directly, but it reduces the atmosphere as a whole. It's a constant reminder that you're watching a video, and all of a sudden you're unable to trick yourself into thinking you're watching a real fireplace. It's a constant but minor distraction to an otherwise great video, and that's exactly what the UI in New World feels like to me. And this is a shame too, because I actually love the animations for the UI. For example, collecting loot shows an animation of it entering your bag, and then the bag fills up with a bar so you can see what your current weight is. It's a small touch, but something that clearly had a lot of good work put into it. And all the UI elements individually have these nice touches and satisfying level of polish. I just wish that they would automatically fade away when I don't need them, so I can get truly immersed into the world instead of getting constant reminders that I'm simply playing a video game. While everything I have been talking about up to this point has been subjective, I do feel I need to bring up performance and bugs that I've seen during my time playing the game. Running around a city, even on the lowest settings, is constantly in a state of stuttering and struggling to load in textures. The same can't be said for traveling out in the wilderness, so it seems to be isolated to heavy traffic areas. However, out in the wild, there are still a fair amount of bugs that I have witnessed, including one particular lynx, which will no doubt become my new sleep paralysis nightmare. My computer is by no means top of the line, but it has moderate specs, and the fact that these stutters occur even on the absolute lowest settings leads me to believe that there is some optimization that still needs to be done on New World. I feel I've been pretty harsh on New World throughout this video, but by no means do I think this game is bad. In fact, it is currently the most fun I've had in an MMO in a while. The freedom of not being tied to a particular class, the beautiful environments, and excellent combat mechanics all make this not just a fun MMO, but a really fun RPG in general. It's been a long time since an MMO has gotten me excited to continue leveling so I can see the more challenging and endgame content. I never played New World at launch, but from what I understand, it was in a pretty rough shape, and it has improved greatly from those early months. If the trajectory of the game continues to improve, I'm looking forward to seeing what is in store for players. I hope they improve performance and are able to resolve some of the bugs that I encountered. I hope they add in further customization to the user interface so it can be immersive for me and other players as we play. New World is a really fun game, but it still has some elements that could use some work. And that's okay, because MMOs are games that are always evolving over time. The developers have made something really special here, and if they keep working at it, I think this is one MMO that will remain on my radar for the foreseeable future. Thanks for watching, everyone, and take it easy.